It was not planned to sign the agreement between Iran and the United States. Who decided and how did it happen? Did you suggest it to the American president?
It happened quite spontaneously after several days, since the American president had been in France since Monday, for this G7 summit, which allowed, I believe, important progress. And the agreement had been reached hours earlier and was supposed to be finalized. There were back and forth between the Iranian side and the American side. This was finalized in the final hours of this G7, and that's what the teams decided. The president thought it was best to go ahead. It was good not to wait, so it could be signed under these terms, and a new phase could begin.
So, was it the Americans who wanted to do it in Versailles?
It's a mutual agreement.
Hello?
This is a good thing, and lets us put everything in the context of the G7, which ultimately allowed what?
For international cooperation to resume.
And we will return to this assessment of this G7. In fact, yes, you welcome this agreement. We will come back to it in detail, this 14-point agreement. But there is a first question that arises. After 108 days of conflict, destabilization of the region, and risk of escalation, who won this war, Mr. President?
I don't think we can say that it is over. We've known the situation there for years. Nobody wants, and France first of all, for Iran to ever obtain a nuclear bomb. That's why, in 2015, the first agreement was signed. Then it was denounced in 2018 by the United States. We fought hard. And basically, France's position is Iran must not have a nuclear bomb nor ballistic capabilities, that is, long-range missiles, and must stop destabilizing the region, especially Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen.
Does France still stand by all that?
A war has begun. It's a question, but the answer isn't immediate. Step by step, that's what I tried at this G7 summit and have been working on for years. The United States launches the war at the end of February this year due to dissatisfaction with negotiations. We say at that moment that we won't take part in that war.
We do not share the objectives, as they seem unclear.
For weeks we have called for an end to the fighting and for structuring future negotiations. And therefore I think it's a good thing. That's why we support it. Because what this signed agreement allows is to establish a ceasefire, and a ceasefire that also concerns Lebanon. Secondly, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. And this morning, a boat with a French flag managed to pass through the strait.
Let's go to the reopening of the Strait.
This directly affects the economies. By the way, the price of oil has started to go down, and let's see, at the pumps, that was expected and it's part of our role. Third thing they say, for 60 days let there be peace and let Lebanon find peace again, which is a very important goal for us. Therefore, this has to be maintained. And then we will structure the negotiation. At the end of those 60 days, we will know, so that everyone keeps in mind what we will do regarding nuclear and ballistic issues and whether we will have a less dangerous Iran than before. I can't say that today. I know that in any case, it's always better to have an agreement than war, especially when there's a risk of escalation, and that was the case. It's something that will allow us to help Lebanon regain control of its territory, reopen key routes for our economies, and start this negotiation. But actually, if after 60 days all the terms are not approved, we can extend it. But we've entered a new phase of cooperation and dialogue, which is better than war, it seems to me, and a more effective way for everyone. Actually, what was the difficulty of this war from the beginning? What was the objective? If the objective was to destroy nuclear capabilities, we would have already had the operations in the spring of 2020 and 2025, and then we have enriched uranium. That's a fundamental issue in the negotiation. We need to know whether we dilute it on site or transfer it under the control of the International Atomic Energy Agency. A second objective could have been to say, we will destroy all ballistic capabilities. That's what was done. But the United States didn't declare the war over or claim success. And so there was ambiguity from the beginning, and it seemed that the objective could be regime change. But we don't get regime change with bombings. We didn't do that. Did he understand Donald Trump? I'm not going to speak for President Trump. What I observe is that he had people around him in the political sphere, at home, in the region, who were pushing him to go much further and much stronger. And what I see is that regime change is a goal that, first of all, is achieved by the people themselves. In any case, that's what we firmly believe in. Otherwise, they are large ground operations. It's months, years of war. Look at what happened in Afghanistan. Did regime change succeed after more than 10 years? No. Therefore, we need to have a lot of humility and clarity. Therefore, regarding the objectives that were sought, which were legitimate, we have Iran militarily weaker and weaker in nuclear terms as well. Iran's population has endured significant suffering. But what do they tell them? A population opposed to its regime that regrouped somewhat out of nationalism and patriotism. And therefore, I think the whole region needed peace to be restored. I also think of the Gulf countries and the affected region, that France was helped by our defense agreements, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, but also Bahrain and Kuwait. And so I think it needed peace. Now I would say a new phase begins.
Precisely in this new phase, can these issues you raise be resolved in a face-to-face between Iran and the United States? The nuclear issue, the ballistic issue, and even some points of disagreement that I would like to discuss with you? When we learned that, in this agreement, Iran would get the lifting of sanctions, the unfreezing of frozen funds, a reconstruction fund of $300 billion in exchange for vague promises from Iran. About these points,
So I think we shouldn't take everything with us. Yes, there are initial things that will happen, which I mentioned. And by the way, we are available to help. And with the British, we implemented this international mission. So we can be there, we can send our fighter jets very quickly in 24 hours. For now, they want to manage it according to the terms of the agreement, and that's what's happening. But there's a lot of work. We can send our mine deactivators, our aircraft carrier with the frigates that surround it. We will also help with reopening it, as we have experience managing the English Channel. So this is the first element. The second, about the rest of the negotiation, that's why you should note that the position we maintained was to say that it wasn't a good idea. That's why we didn't join this war. Now, a week ago, where we were, a continuous war, bombings happening, in a possible escalation, and there's no place. Or we don't go to the same places where in France they don't say, do something about the price of gasoline. Do something for our economy. We look at global forecasts where we saw that it was decreasing. What needs to be done? Where do we put the weight? Obviously, to make peace. I do not go back on the justifications for this war. If I shared them, I would join France's effort. At this moment, we have reason to congratulate ourselves, as it's in the interest of France and the region.
I could also say, as the President of France, that there are certain things that for us are unacceptable.
Things need to be done methodically, with method. In other words, when there is a war and when it is entirely possible to end the conflict, then yes, we say yes. Then a new phase begins. What is important to say? But no, we say what is important to us. For us, it can't just be yes or no, otherwise we don't move forward. Otherwise, history happens. That's everything the G7 revealed about Ukraine and the region. So what do we say? For us, it's important that the Strait remains open on a lasting basis. This is what we propose with the British, our mission. Second thing we say, Lebanon is important and we are committed. And so this afternoon I saw the Lebanese Prime Minister. He was by my side. He will return in a few days. What should we do? We proposed that to President Trump and are working on it with several regional countries. We will mobilize the international community to help the Lebanese army regain control of its territory. Second thing, in this agreement we say the ceasefire in Lebanon applies to Hezbollah, applies to Iran, applies to Israel.
Which is not being respected at this point.
Things have improved a lot in recent days. So there are some setbacks happening, but nothing compared to what we experienced before. Therefore, pressure must be applied to everyone. Pressure on Iran, pressure from the United States on Israel. And under the terms of this agreement, the withdrawal of Israeli forces is provided for. And therefore, we will have to build. France played an important role 2 years ago when there had already been an invasion of southern Lebanon, and we coordinated that. Here, we will work with the United States, with Lebanon, with Israel, to restore control of the territory and also bring Hezbollah's weapons under the control of the Lebanese armed forces. So what should we do? Listen to me. If you have answers for everything or doubts about everything, I'll leave you alone. But you need to have patience and we need to have humility. What do we do in concrete terms? So, regarding Lebanon, we will resume things and mobilize funding from the region and the international community to help those Lebanese armed forces. Finally, there's the Iranian nuclear negotiation. This negotiation will start between the United States and Iran, just like in 2015. However, for this to be concluded, Germany, the United Kingdom, and France are indispensable because we are the ones who can lift the international sanctions that are decided within the framework of the UN. Next, we are a power with experience, we will be involved. And what I suggested to the United States was to involve all the countries in the region, because this war has clearly demonstrated one thing: all the neighbors in the region are victims. They must be included in this lasting peace agreement. We are at the beginning of the process. Not everything is resolved. Are there question marks? There are many, and I share them. But what is my role? To act, to propose, to be in command.
I would just like to make an observation about Benjamin Netanyahu's attitude, who has already clearly stated that he wants to keep his troops there. Donald Trump, who logically has good relations with the Israeli Prime Minister, called him this afternoon, urging him to act rationally. Is that the word you use as well?
I would say that he should demonstrate a spirit of responsibility and rationality. I believe Prime Minister Netanyahu currently lacks a policy. He achieved real security results, defended his country against threats. I disagreed with him about what he did in Gaza very early on, because I believe that he did not fight only against a terrorist group, which was legitimate after the attack of October 7, 2023, but that he also targeted civilian populations unjustifiably. But the policy that continues to be carried out in Gaza, the policy that is being implemented in the West Bank, with new and ongoing settlements and absolutely unacceptable acts, and the policy that is being carried out in southern Lebanon in the long term goes against the interests of Israel because it fuels resentment and violence among all the populations in the region. And therefore today this cannot happen overnight. I do not underestimate that Hezbollah is a risk for Israel. That's true. And that's why, in this agreement, what we have to finalize is how Lebanon returns. It takes control of the weapons, and fundamentally, we guarantee the security of Israel. And Israel must be involved in this. But its security cannot be guaranteed by conquering neighboring territory. And this is very important.
Mr. President, and so?
President Trump, to answer your question, has in recent days marked a change of attitude toward Prime Minister Netanyahu. I believe only these conditions will allow us to build peace.
One more note on the Strait of Hormuz, as much remains at stake there today. What guarantee do you have that the Strait of Hormuz will not, at the end of these negotiations, these 60 days of negotiations in some way, be privatized or blocked by the Iranians, who are already saying they will charge service fees, charging a kind of toll?
First, we did not obtain a guarantee, because this is not an agreement in which France is participating. We pushed for this to happen and be carried out. I called throughout all these months, both President Trump and President Pezeshkian, with the goal of ending this conflict and sitting at the table to discuss and negotiate productively. But today it wasn't us who signed this agreement. It provides for unconditional reopening for 60 days. What we saw this morning is heading in the right direction, we'll check. Then in my view, it's a topic for discussion. President Trump told me yesterday, the agreement is very clear. It will be reopened without tariffs, etc. And international law is clear in this regard. Both international law and practice mean free movement and no tariffs, no service fees, etc. This applies from the English Channel to Malacca, including Bab el-Mandeb. It's important to respect this.
Does this mean a return to normal fuel prices for the French who are watching?
Listen, I'm cautious. I'll tell you what we can do and why. You're right to say that this agreement raises some questions. We will stay vigilant and work to address them step by step. But the signing of this agreement immediately lowered prices. They had soared, the prices came back down. It should have been about $80 or $81 a barrel not long ago, or a little less. Prices at the pump have started to fall and will continue to decrease. And now it needs to stabilize. If we stabilize, they will go down. And then we will reactivate production capacities. And at the same time, and this was also a decision made by this G7, we need to learn from what happened. We can't all depend on this strait. And so we decided to jointly fund all the alternative routes. That is, so that oil and gas can exit on the other side of Hormuz in the territory of the United Arab Emirates through Fujairah, so that they can also be transported through pipelines, and oil pipelines through Saudi Arabia and then through Egypt to Europe, so that they can also exit through Iraq, Syria and Lebanon to reach the Mediterranean Sea as well. In other words, diversify our energy infrastructure to depend less on this Strait of Hormuz and its passage for security. Because otherwise we give them a tool for pressure, and that's something the Iranians clearly discovered during the war.
And there was pressure, especially on the economy, with growth forecasts down and inflation up. What is the cost of this war for the French economy?
It's too soon to tell. Even as forecasts are revised downward, forecasts and actual results from the past 2 years for our economy have been revised upward. That's good news. If we manage to stabilize here, the forecast we saw a few days ago will be revised upward, because they themselves were based on barrel prices that were above $100 for the second half of the year. So I don't want to overwhelm people with numbers, but it's still too early. Wars like this weigh on our economies. That's also why economically it's good to have some relief. Then, in the global economic context, France is holding up much better than our neighbors and the major neighboring economies. And France in recent years has posted growth that is notably higher than Germany's and even Italy's.
From war to war, from crisis to crisis, let's talk about Ukraine. We saw today that Ukraine hit one of the largest Russian refineries actually not far from Moscow. Is Ukraine winning this war?
Listen, Ukraine is resisting with remarkable bravery, an ability to innovate, and a military production capacity that has amazed all observers since day one. So it's holding up very well, better than expected. For over 4.5 years, experts have repeatedly said they'll collapse or not survive the winter every 3 months. Not only did they make it through the most terrible winter they've ever known, but they also recovered some areas of territory. And in the technological war that is being fought, we have a front line, that infamous death zone, which is terrible along the Donbass and stretches down to Crimea. In that area, it's a drone war. Obviously, it's a war where men fight, many deaths, huge losses, in fact, many Russian losses, right? Every month, more than 30,000 men are neutralized on the Russian side, wounded or killed, just imagine. But we have nowadays a drone war. And in this war, Ukraine's production capacity is truly astonishing.
And that Donald Trump clearly understood. That's what you said. You mentioned that during this G7, there was a turning point when Donald Trump realized that Ukraine could have an advantage on the ground. And do you consider Vladimir Putin a loser? A word he uses often, someone who failed?
Oh, listen, I think the key thing about everything that happened during this G7 is that we managed to bring everyone together, including key economic partners of what we call the G7, plus Korea, India, Kenya, Brazil, Egypt. And there was a strong willingness from everyone to cooperate on the major issues. And I think what President Trump saw was that we can disagree on everything, but cooperate, yes, coming together, is useful for him in the Middle East. It's also useful for Ukraine. He realized that deep down when he arrived, he believed Ukraine would lose, so he sought quick peace. Remember, January, February of 2025, he thought it was an eternity. He expected Ukraine to lose. Things were going badly in the Oval Office with President Zelensky. Less than a year ago, there was a summit meeting between President Trump and President Putin in Anchorage, where an agreement was almost presented to say, let's give away Ukrainian territory that hasn't even been conquered yet. Then in August, we go as a delegation to Washington to say this isn't possible. We tried. Yes, a huge path has been traveled. That path is the victory of the Ukrainians in their ability and credibility. President Trump realized everything he'd been told was false. They wouldn't collapse or fail to survive the winter. He encountered brave, innovative people he respected. The second thing, he saw the Europeans taking on their responsibilities. What we have done in these last few months, the creation of this coalition of armed volunteers who will be at the July 14th parade. It is the Europeans, along with some Canadian, Japanese, and Australian allies, who alongside Ukraine are saying, we will build these security guarantees after peace. It is not a burden. The United States says they will guarantee this. And the third thing is that he also saw that Russia was not fulfilling its commitments. And where there was a Russia saying, yeah, I want peace, he realized their idea of peace meant Ukraine surrendering. And he understood. So yes, there was a real change at this G7 summit that should be welcomed, a step forward.
But would anyone go so far as to say that Donald Trump could at some point pressure Vladimir Putin? Do you think it has come to that? Listen, Russia?
One consequence of what's happening in the Near and Middle East is falling prices. Another consequence is that volumes will be released, allowing pressure to be exerted again on what comes out of Russia, for which an exception was made in the war by the United States. And I am convinced that President Trump will increase the commitment to collectively help Ukraine in this war effort, both to defend and protect its land, as well as to deter Russia with important intelligence elements, but also to put more pressure on Russia and its economy and to bring it back to the negotiating table. Not in a position of supplicant, not accepting peace terms that are a capitulation, but rather allowing the construction of a lasting and sustainable peace, with a territorial agreement acceptable to both parties and decided only by the two, with security guarantees. In this regard, it is a real and significant advance. And the quality of the discussion that took place between President Zelensky and President Trump, and for the first time since his election, the convergence and consensus found among the Europeans, Canada, Japan, and the United States, this represents an important advance in recent days.
Just quickly, you, the Europeans in France, took steps to encourage this necessary dialogue. You will tell me what you think about this between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky.
We constantly pressure him, but I have to note that for now it is being refused by Russia. Therefore, we will continue to push for it. I think what is important now is that Russia seriously requests this dialogue in a constructive way. But President Zelensky told President Trump and me, I am ready for President Putin to come, for example, to Geneva within a UN framework, and that while we are in Evian, we could go see him. So the opportunity was not taken, as people commonly say. President Putin did not want it. I think this dialogue is more important than ever. I see that Russia is not ready today, but I also see that the United States is engaging with us in this approach. And I saw President Trump, but also his Secretary of State, Secretary Rubio, being extremely clear about what they were willing to move forward with and the terms of the discussion, as well as the timelines.
Including in their relations with us. Keeping up with the United States' stance on Europe isn't always easy. And during this G7 summit, we clearly saw that you tried to smooth things over with Donald Trump, avoiding delicate topics like global warming while France is suffocating right now. Mr. President, you managed to get him to back down on his threats of tariffs on French wines, which would have had a significant impact.
Yes, so you're right. There are issues on which we don't agree. There are issues on which we will not agree. Equality between men and women, the climate. The link to international law is significant. I dedicate a section to the climate, talking about important issues. I really want to urge all our fellow citizens who are listening to be very vigilant, to take care of the elderly, the vulnerable, as well as the children, and to closely follow all the government's recommendations because these are difficult days we are living through. Therefore, it's important to be careful and heed advice. Let me close that aside. We don't agree with this, but I'm pragmatic. Therefore, I tried to have G7 where I involved the Americans everywhere we could have agreements. And look, Ukraine, we disagreed, but we reached an agreement. We didn't agree on the Near and Middle East. The United States wanted to attack. We found a way and supported it.
And what about French wine?
I'm getting there, but about cancer, about health. Think about it. Yes, very important information was released. I say this because it's a topic that affects millions of our fellow citizens. For the first time at the G7, there was an agreement on cancer to share data. This is fundamental, especially for pediatric cancers or the most serious cancers. A major breakthrough at this G7 about critical minerals and rare earths. There we reached agreements that experts thought would be very difficult to achieve before. In the bilateral relationship, the style is always a bit provocative. More precisely, it's a form of threat to establish a power dynamic. So, we had the discussion beforehand. The first hour and a half of this G7 summit before we started the discussion was for bilateral dialogue. We prepared everything. I prepared about Ukraine, the Middle East, and the Near East. Then we talked about trade. And I told President Trump, that's true. I told him first, there is an agreement that has been reached, signed, and approved in Europe. Stability now. I have a concern. The Chinese economy. Don't attack us. It's counterproductive for you. That doesn't solve things. He listens anyway. Then I tell him, now start a new debate, the digital tax. If they don't withdraw it, tax French wine. First I say, you are not being fair, as I believe 8 countries have implemented the digital tax. So why? And then I explained why we created this digital tax. Because some big groups that sell a lot of services to our companies make a lot of money but don't pay taxes. I said otherwise. And then we decided to start working. So we calm down. That's the discussion. Things get said. I want to reassure the sector. The wineries know that I will always be by their side, supporting them. We fought alongside cognac in China. We fought a few years ago for rosé in the United States. Now we fight peacefully. Our conversation and yesterday's bilateral meeting don't reflect the mindset of someone planning to tax you. On the other hand, let's clarify things and start working with the American administration to show that we should tax these groups that today don't pay taxes in our country. If it's a minimum tax, we'll find a technical solution. Let's discuss taxes. But look, that's what matters.
About the method, perfectly clear.
We talked about this. So what I want you to take away from this is don't worry about it.
We saw Donald Trump consider us as adversaries, sometimes even as enemies, when he cut off our access to the powerful AI model from the American company Anthropic. Is this an appropriate way to behave with allies? Did you tell him that as well?
So I think so, of course. First I said it, then I explained, then we had discussions. Both at the G7 we had a dedicated session with a dozen technology and artificial intelligence leaders. And then we talked at length together and our teams together. There's an alarm clock. That's what happens. First, what's happening with innovation? Artificial intelligence is accelerating. Artificial intelligence is a learning machine.
Do you use it?
I, of course, use artificial intelligence to do a multitude of things, research, improve, understand. I don't delegate myself to it, but I use it. And so, since I promote Mistral AI a lot, I use the chat, okay?
Just the cat.
I encourage all my interlocutors to do it, because by using it, we will give it everything and continue to train and improve it. France can be proud. Let me make an aside here, with a bit of patriotic boasting, if you don't mind, about AI before I go back. You have to know how to look. When it works, I have to say, frankly, it's amazing. Yes, we are the country that created the most jobs in AI in Europe. Far from it. We are the country that creates the most AI startups in Europe. We are the country that trains the most. We were the first to launch a strategy. People are waking up to the public debate. We need to create AI. Luckily, we didn't wait for them. In 2018, France had an AI strategy and a quantum strategy. In 2019, we invested the most in this area. Today, there are two leaders, the United States and China. Europe has fallen behind. We are by far the best in Europe. Yes, the only ones in these famous and important large language models. So Mistral compared to Open ChatGPT, Anthropic, and other similar ones, etc. The only ones that are not American or Chinese are Canada and us. We are the only two countries that have them. So we have to move forward. Simply, what is that? No, but exactly.
I'll give some numbers, but you know them.
I know them, but it's important to say.
Your Prime Minister announced investments for AI. And in the United States, it's $600 billion in public money, not counting the billions of dollars poured in by the tech giants, by these private companies. Where is the public funding? We can invest as much as the United States, for example.
But besides that, we have all the money invested in France 2030.
The initiative was launched nearly 5 years ago.
I will announce changes in
October
for
France 2030.
We invested billions in our AI.
Even more.
No, because we're operating at the scale of the United States and Europe. We, the French, invest much more public money than many of our neighbors. Secondly, it is necessary to mobilize private money. We launched a new fund, third generation, the TIBI funds. We are going to invest 15 billion euros mobilized in our institutes. This is private to move forward. Next, we gather private funds that go towards AI. But our Europe needs to invest more. That's why the battle I'll fight at the European level when I leave here is for a much bigger budget and more public funding. Today, Europe doesn't invest enough in AI. We, the French, consume more than our neighbors. We, Europeans, don't consume enough.
Are you talking to Germans?
Of course, but a few months ago I was in Berlin at a digital summit for that, and this year at Vivatech the guest of honor is Germany. And so I think we are going to convince them on this matter and we will succeed. But we are in the fight. France is at the European forefront. We are European champions. Now we want to be in the world competition, to use a football metaphor, so we must continue to invest. And I want our fellow citizens to understand why. We need to invest private money because that money allows us to build and buy data centers and thus buy processing capacity and even more. And this processing capacity allows your models to be operational. Today, Anthropic, when they create their Mythos 5 or Fables 5 models, both of which are banned, train them with computing power 15 times greater than what we can mobilize. We mobilize far more than our neighbors. Therefore, we must continue to implement our strategy, which is to invest in data centers. And here France is way ahead, lucky to have nuclear energy available and at low cost. Therefore, data centers, talent, defending our ecosystem like Mistral, Alan, all our fantastic companies, and accelerating this and having a much stronger European strategy, more investment. So this is the first battle to respond to what has been done. Now back to your question. What happened exactly a week ago was important for the Americans. It was their first wake-up call. Until now, the American administration said not to regulate artificial intelligence. Now they understand that it's dangerous. I'm glad. 2 years ago, when we had our artificial intelligence summit, everyone was telling us not to regulate. There was little reaction. So we told them, if it's dangerous, share it with trusted partners.
And with your allies.
And so you'll see that in the coming days we'll reach agreements so that these models are shared with government authorities responsible for security and cybersecurity, because it's a cybersecurity issue for our hospitals, for our banks, and so on. And then they will reopen it commercially. We will resolve this matter in the coming days and weeks.
Investing in the private sector since we lack public funds. Use the leverage power.
Put both.
Leverage and power are in Versailles and reflected in GDP, an important metric. When we see French growth stalled, unemployment rising again, and French debt at 3,500 billion, do you think in the end that France is more powerful today than when you came to power?
I think that France and Europe are experiencing a turning point of independence, but I think that France today has stronger armies. Agreed. You speak of power. It has a stronger and clearer diplomacy. This summit is an illustration. It has consolidated growth higher than that of Germany or Italy. And therefore France, in the last 10 years, has grown more than Germany, has grown more than Italy, which did not happen in the previous 15 years for the Franco-German partnership. France has been reindustrializing for 7 years. Even in the difficult times we are living through, we have created more companies than we have lost, more industrial jobs. France is the leader in artificial intelligence in Europe. France is the energy leader in Europe. 10 years ago, I took over a country planning to shut down its nuclear plants and stop investing in nuclear, but we completely changed that. We export 90 terawatt hours per year. That's what allows us to be good. We have one problem, our public finances. The key to our public finances is knowing how to keep taking responsibility. I wanted to move forward but lacked full pension support. But our social model needs to be reformed, and that will be the task of those who succeed us. It's a necessity because in a country that has the most generous social model in the world, a country that dedicates most of its gross domestic product to public spending, if we don't introduce more efficiency and if we don't reform this model, we won't be able to have lasting and sustainable power. So I'm not being catastrophic by saying that everything is at a standstill. That's false. We reduced unemployment much more than our neighbors. We resisted. We have all the criteria by which we are stronger. Now we need to have the courage to be more effective in public spending. The drop in unemployment that we achieved in these 9 years.
But unemployment is rising again.
Finally, sorry, compared to the situation 9 years ago, no. And so we managed to consolidate all of this. Including the current government, the Prime Minister implemented an unemployment insurance reform that allows for savings. Therefore, all of this needs to be consolidated. It will be necessary to resume the reform. It is essential in an aging country. It is necessary to continue making smart savings in healthcare, that is, to make people more responsible and our medicine more individualized. This also means continuing the work in prevention. More effective spending by the state and local authorities is needed.
There are people who might look at you and wonder why you didn't do it.
But sorry, I did that. And I did that in many areas. But I also congratulate myself for having doubled the disarmament budget. Otherwise, what would we say today? For raising the number of police officers and the judges' budget by 60%. Look at what the country has gone through again.
That's exactly what we're going to talk about, justice. Well,
if I hadn't done all this, they could say I lacked resources. But look at what we've accomplished. I consider that I was elected in 2020 and 2022 presenting to the French people a pension reform at 60 and 65 years old. I am forced to acknowledge that it was not accepted, it was not supported, and then our parliamentary majority went back on that decision. And that's democratic life. Yes, I can regret it, I do regret it, but that's democracy. It's the most effective and relevant thing to do to reduce our expenses. Because the pension system is the biggest public expense today. If we don't reform it in an aging country, we're being hypocrites.
Let's talk about justice. You briefly mentioned, referring to the tragedy that shook the French, the death of Liana. You had Liana's family on the phone. Gérald Darmanin, Minister of Justice, apologized on behalf of French justice. Did you do that on behalf of France?
I won't put it in that context, and I don't think so. I have my family, and it's in the dignity of this exchange and humanity that I want to remain. And then, for our country, I just say that the government, well, it will have to show what it's going to do. First of all, it's a topic, a cause that I've been defending for many years, and we've already done a lot about it. There is a profound transformation underway.
But we almost made it.
But obviously there were things. I said from day one that not everything was done correctly. Now there is an inspection requested that will be delivered on June 22nd. I'm not going to preempt and start assigning blame to others. I'm not here to share my feelings. I express them directly to the families experiencing these tragedies. What I know is that we have never been inactive.
We must also acknowledge we're increasing our demands on our forces.
And that there was a hidden continent. Freedom of expression was granted. CVC, I'm very happy to have created it, and it brought many things into the open. And I would just like to remind you that when I was elected, in our prisons, where there were fewer detainees than today, 7 out of 7 were imprisoned for sexual and gender-based violence. Today, it's 3 times more. So this means that yes, there are still pending cases, but there are many people who have been arrested, detained, and who before were completely silent stories. Because starting from 2018, we changed the deadline, and therefore there has been continuous work done in recent years. Yes, our societies live in violence with unacceptable situations. And yes, when we lift the lid on situations experienced in recent years, we all feel a sense of outrage at what can be done, because harming a child is the worst thing. And yes, we always tell ourselves it's impossible that we didn't see it. We never get used to it. Deep down, that's what I want to say. Never get used to it. Always be outraged. But this outrage shouldn't mean helplessness and shouldn't mean revenge.
You said violence shouldn't be met with violence, no.
But it should allow us. I was talking about the political forces. The idiotic controversy was unacceptable.
I was talking about the political forces.
And immediately,
We will make a law. Review what succeeded and failed, and consider all actions taken. Maybe some unnecessary things, but a lot was done. What can be improved? It should be done calmly and methodically to be effective. But above all, I tell you, this indignation, if we want it to be fertile and productive, must be translated into useful actions, and not just a kind of pose. Deep down, the illness we have is a form of forgiveness, of trust and consideration for ourselves. If France no longer has self-confidence and self-esteem, what great things does it expect to accomplish? And I tell you that we should talk about our diplomacy, military, economy, AI, justice, and security forces. We are a great country, and we must look at our failures and shortcomings with clarity. We must all make an effort together to fix them. But we should not, when there's a tragedy or a problem, all tear ourselves apart and say, we are lost, stuck. I've stopped counting resignations and claims that we're doomed. Honestly, we should have been dead years ago. No, we are a great country, and we have shown that in recent days. Only a great country can do what we did, and it was the French who made it happen.
And in this room, where the country's nuclear defense councils are held, do you ever imagine your successor in your place?
I don't talk about those things.
We think about it.
And we're not obliged to say everything we think.
In a brutalized world, after everything we've said tonight, what qualities should your successor have?
The French know that. I trust them. We are a great country, a great people, and they know how to choose what is good for them and know how to seize their destiny and their future. It is necessary to shed light on the debate, and therefore my role will be to act until the end, to maintain the unity of the country and to ensure that the debate is well clarified regarding the major challenges. But the French will know how to choose.
Are you confident?
yes,
First of all, because we have these strengths, we go through dramas, tough moments, emotions. You recalled some of them and moved me a lot. But we are a great people, and we are a very political people in the noble sense of the word. French women and men like politics and choose what is good for their future.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, and thank you for coming here.